Okay, so tidbits from previous sessions. I thought this would reassure Californians. Denmark might buy California. So
Well,
we
maybe they just want our precious metals.
uh, and so they're talking about Denmarkification. So yeah, Jim.
There was quite a little article in the New York Times yesterday, I believe, about how Denmark's progressivism has survived amidst all the right-wing activity in Europe. And the key point was that they had um, held immigration down. So the foreign born in Denmark are 12 now up to 12.5%, whereas Germany is at 20%, for example.
Yeah. You know what the United States is?
Yes.
Not sure. I've seen various figures.
Well, it's quite
15%.
low.
15% was the latest figure I saw.
Yeah, I think that's about what I've seen.
This is
And
percentage of people born elsewhere.
Correct.
and when Trump in his first administration suggested that he'd much prefer to have immigrants from Norway than the shithole countries, language, he didn't know that Norway was already at 17% foreign born, which is higher than the United States.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sweden is much higher as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that was a long, long article by David Leonhardt, who's a good writer.
That's the one.
I think
He
it's a New
wrote
York
the
Magazine,
article. Yes.
it's magazine length.
He wrote the article that I read yesterday. So I think it was in the Times as
It
well.
was.
There's been that big debate about whether immigrants cost us money or make us money. I know I've seen several things in California. You can get people who say it costs us $5 billion a year, or they bring in $5 billion a year. So
Maybe they do both.
maybe.
well, we went through this way back with Proposition 187.
Right.
And I think it was established pretty clearly back then. I'd be surprised if it's changed. That they pay taxes, they pay sales taxes.
Social Security tax, which
They
they're
pay,
not,
they pay Social Security tax.
not going to
Which
get
they
that
do
back.
not get the benefit of if they are on a fake W-9 with an employer, which maybe 500,000 are.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, yeah. But by the way, as a result of talking about Greenland, um, uh, Bob turned me on, Aiko and I, to Borgen, which is about a female prime minister that takes over in Denmark, and with I don't know which came first, but reality imitates art. They've got a very strong female prime minister now who is going toe to toe with Trump. So there you go. And she's been going toe to toe with him since the first since 2017. All right. And then there's this bill that's just been put before Congress. Uh, uh, so, and then Carol submitted this about the error that Doge made. So I'll let that speak for itself.
Well, that was Andy Borowitz. It's what is known as satire, John.
Okay. That was Borowitz. Okay. But Carol gets a finder's fee.
Okay, I'm sorry to rain on the parade.
So some good news, California water. The reservoirs are nice and full. And in fact, they're releasing water to prevent the flood damage. So maybe what Trump had done wasn't so bad after all. And I guess we'll be okay for the summer. And no Lake Tulare has resulted this year. So the Gulf of Mexico, just another bit of good news on this. So that he threw out the AP, but guess what? Fox News, along with others, spoke up and defended the AP from Trump's throwing them out. So I thought that was remarkably good. And then in covering all this, there's something I stumbled on called the Associated Press style book, and what's that? And this gets issued periodically, and it is a way that journalists should write, just recommendations. But they have checklists for self-editing, and I'm not quite sure what that means. But I heard some journalists kind of speaking resentfully about the style book. And of course, it's getting swept up in the DEI stuff, in addition to the Gulf of Mexico. And so there's this interesting thing, inclusive storytelling, just a reminder to journalists. So the Associated Press. More good news is that a lot of 78% of the Inflation Reduction Act went to Republican congressional districts. That's $130 billion. So if they start trying to claw back or block or impound some of these funds, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot. I'm just about out of good news here. But here's a little bit more. Just remember, people who voted, more people voted for someone other than Trump than voted for Trump. His approval rating is 47%. It's the lowest of any president going back at this stage to 1953. 43% support what Trump has done in general, but only 27 strongly support, and 57% think Trump has gone beyond his authority. Yeah, Bob. Did you have your hand up, Bob?
Yes. Unfortunately, he's constantly referred to as having won the popular vote. He won a plurality of the vote. Maybe plurality is a word. It's not only difficult to pronounce, but maybe it's difficult to understand. Also notice that 37% of the electorate did not vote for anybody. So he won, if you do a quick calculation, something like 34% of the electorate.
I think it was more like 31, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, he got 34 the first time around. But two of the lowest percentages ever recorded for a president.
And compare that to the turnout in the German elections on Sunday, 85% turnout. Perhaps are you going to go into that subject shortly? I'll stop.
No, I'm not going to go into Germany, but as tempted as I was, especially Rudy's a Germanophile. So you go ahead.
Well, the theory is that the initial commentary was that the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, didn't do as well as was expected because we'll call it interference in the German elections actually stimulated more voters for the CDU, CSU, Green Party, and the SDU. So that's why it will be yet another what is called a Kenya coalition. Kenya, because the colors of the three parties are the same as the three colors of the Kenyan flag: black, red, and green. That's a common shortcut in describing a German coalition. It's a Kenyan coalition.
So what's going to be the third party in addition to the CDU and the
Well, it's a CDU slash CSU, which is one conservative grouping. It's one party, really. And then the SDU, which is the current administration, or no longer, and the Green Party.
The Green Party? Okay. That's good. The party that improved the most was Die Linke, which means the left in English. And they seem to do better because Merz, who's the head of the CDU, had needed some of the Alternative for Deutschland votes to get something passed in the Bundestag. I think it was an anti-immigrant legislation. So Die Linke, but they're not going to be part of the coalition. Okay, that's interesting. So the Greens are still at the table. All right. Let's see. So 57% think he's gone beyond his authority. This is a little complicated, but I'm putting it out here and inviting you to just focus on the gray bars as I go through this. Because the gray bars is the total of the population, which summarizes the other three bars. So the red bar is Republican, the blue bar is Democrat, and the tan bars independents on these various issues. So as we go through these things, you'll see that the approval rating goes down, down, down till we get to the bottom where the very skimpy gray bar. So there's a pretty good agreement, or 50% on deporting. Ending DEI programs approaches 50%. The transgender a little bit lower, as is pardoning the January 6th rioters, the non-violent ones. And then laying off a large number of federal workers. Well, now it's getting down maybe close to 37%. And then shutting down agencies that aid low-income countries, USAID, also dropping. And then health agencies, down to about 25% approval, and then pardoning the violent perpetrators of January 6th, very low. So I thought that was interesting. And then Musk is not doing Trump any favors in terms of approval. So there's that. And then we get to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, local Bay Area issue, the Presidio. So I don't know how many of you have walked the Presidio in the last 30 years, but it's being run by a trust. And I wanted to focus on that because Trump is targeting it. This federal trust. Just a little bit on the history. So the original Presidio was the Spanish one. And when we get back to California history, we're about ready to reach the point where they build the Presidio overlooking the Golden Gate. We're at the point where they just discovered the bay, so we're not quite there yet. But the Presidio was obviously placed to guard the Golden Gate and put cannons here to keep ships out. And the trust was targeted, but the trust is actually self-sustaining. And it's Trump can't touch it legally because it's an act of Congress. So Congress would have to reverse itself. And self-sustaining because it's an innovative public-private partnership, and they've taken these old buildings and renovated them and leased them out to various entities. Aiko and I were over there a few months ago, and it's a wonderful campus to walk around in. Very, very peaceful. I don't know if they could do more activity, but here is what we went to see specifically, the Yoda fountain. And it's in the Letterman Digital Arts Center, which is part of Lucasfilms. And we were there on a weekend, and the lobby is closed, but when it's open, you can see this life-size statue of Darth Vader, a selection of books that inspired George Lucas. So we haven't been inside during the weekday, but there's a Starbucks over there, very relaxing. That was open on the weekend. And so it was the top of the list as targets for federal waste and abuse. And besides the Presidio Trust, you have these other international directed organizations. The Institute of Peace would be an obvious one target for right-wingers. And so we'll see. Created by Congress 30 years ago, and it's 1,500 acres, which is larger than I was expecting. And it's been a historic landmark for longer than that, and another 30 years before that. So they work collaboratively with the National Park Service and the Golden Gate National Park Conservancy. And the aim is to keep the area running at the minimal cost to the federal government. And recently it's been break even. They even made some money last year. So,
hey, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Bruce. Hey, one of the things, if you have been over there, there's I think four Andy Goldsworthy sculptures, and that are just really remarkable to view. And one of them actually was some trees that were actually end up being burned up, and that they really turned out great. And there's a path through the woods where there were actually two separate forests, and forget what the name of the tree that ended up actually they all died out. And there's a wonderful quarter mile path as you wandered through the thing. Yeah, at the officers club, there's a Andy Goldsworthy thing with yeah, a lot of good things, and particularly then walking down on that park where the playground is now is really pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's the new tunnel tops. It's David. That's the newest national monument in the country, and people probably know, but this is all a tribute to Phil Burton. Phil wrote legislation. You know, he helped with Point Reyes, but he wrote legislation that if the military ever abandoned the Presidio, that the Presidio Trust would be, and there's like something like 2,000 apartments on the west side. I grew up a half a block from the Presidio on 25th and Lake, so yeah, it's an amazing park, and it's bigger than Golden Gate Park, as you said, John, which is about 1,000 acres. So yeah.
Aniette and I've been there many times, actually. Walked with the grandkids to Tunnel Top Park and picnicked on the large lawn surrounded by those red wooden buildings. I will say this, though, that he's probably targeted the Presidio Trust because it was a favorite of Nancy Pelosi, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And she secured $200 million in the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the largest grant ever afforded to the Presidio Trust. And I haven't seen the finances in detail, but it's quite likely that some of the profit being made in the last 2-3 years, 40 million, 46 million, might result from the accounting treatment of unexpectedly large windfalls. And I'm not going to use the word pork here, but I know why Trump is after the Presidio Trust.
Yeah, he's vindictive, and he goes after things he doesn't like. That's pretty clear.
Well, good, Bob. You've set me up for my next slide. So, so they talk about a 46 million surplus, but I don't know if that's because of the 200 million. But I think the 46 million surplus is just internal to their own operation. But Nancy Pelosi got that into the Inflation Reduction Act. And I wasn't going to use the word pork, but I think you're right on the nose, Bob. Yeah, Homer.
Oh, I just wanted to say on the next to the parade ground, the Delita Cafe is a very good place for lunch. A little expensive, but very, very good.
Okay. And when you go down to the Tunnel Tops Park, that just blends right in with Crissy Field and that walk all the way down to Fort Point. And it's a wonderful complex now. And when you think about what it used to be like over there, trying to get around on what was it, Lincoln Boulevard, and now with that tunnel, everything just flows nice and smoothly. So this $200,000. This is not what $200 million. This is not what Trump's targeting now. This is separate, authorized by Congress. And apparently House Republicans are trying to claw that back with legislation. But they're having a hard time doing anything. So I doubt that they'll be able to do that. But it was unclear what the $200,000 was for, but the wording here, and this is the wording you'd put in a grant, to bolster the park's climate resilience. That's a pretty vague key. Pelosi is fighting back, just pointing out that this was passed, but in a bipartisan way, the Trust Act. 30 years ago. And then you have Scott Wiener on board, just pointing out, hey, this is a self-sustaining trust, so what's the problem? And Adam Schiff is pointing out legally that Congress can't claw back funds that have already been obligated. We'll see how that works. And Trump hasn't targeted this 200 million, has not. All right. Any other comments about domestic politics before we turn to foreign policy and the international? Okay. Ukraine. I mean, we can't go on without at least commenting. We've spent so much time on Ukraine. And I thought this graph just cleared things up. Trump claims that America has given 3 times more to Ukraine than the Europeans have. Actually, the Europeans nose out America in terms of allocated aid. And you see the aid broken into 3 types of aid: military, financial, and humanitarian. Europeans have given much more humanitarian aid than we had. Some of the USAID programs have been operating in Ukraine. So this blue sliver may get even less. But then the promised aid has yet to be allocated. I don't know how much credit we should give the Europeans for this, but they've promised a lot more, and we'll see. I think this was interesting. Ranking the countries in terms of absolute, of course, the United States does lead. EU institutions, Germany, Britain, in terms of absolute. But what's particularly interesting is the percent of GDP devoted as aid to Ukraine. And these other parts of the bar graph didn't come through, but at least you get the idea of who's been giving the most, and it's mostly the Balts. They're the most afraid, along with Poland, of Russia's next move. And then, so they're the top 5. Then you go down and skip all the way. In 12th position is the United States, which isn't bad. But it's interesting as a percent of GDP. Germany and France for all the talk, and we'll talk about Macron in just a second, is pretty low in terms of allocations to Ukraine. This is a little bit clearer in terms of the share of GDP. And the interesting things I thought here is Slovakia is pretty high, but as of the moment, they're with Hungary in being doubters of Ukraine. The United States and the United Kingdom are bunched together here as a share of GDP. And then again, further down is Germany. And it's interesting that Japan even makes it onto this table, given that they're so far away. But I think they see this as a stand-in for their concern about China. So they're going to help Ukraine, because if Ukraine defeats Russia, that makes them more secure that China won't try anything. And then look how far down France is again. Pretty low in terms of share of GDP. So why is Poland spending so much on defense? This is from a very scathing essay, and Poland spending a lot about the scathing is about Trump. And you see that Poland is right up there, right behind Scandinavians and the Balts, because they've been invaded by Russia 5 times. And they would have been more, except they were occupied by Russia for 57% of the last 200 years. And we've talked often about Poland being divided up periodically. And this is a particularly interesting map. It's usually been divided up by 3 powers, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Prussia. And Russia's in different shades of green at different periods of time. So when you divide up Poland, you take it in slices every decade or so. And the green are the first slice that Russia took, the second slice, the third slice. So they have reason to be concerned, especially the Poles. But this essay went on and talked about the cult of personality. As part of this essay, that Trump didn't want to give Poland credit for doing what it's doing in its own self-interest. Trump tried to get Poland to say they were doing it because in response to his foreign policy. And it's getting more and more noticeable now when people talk in the administration talk about Trump. The phrases, only Trump can fix this. Thank goodness for Trump. And I think one of the Balts offered for aid to name an army base for Trump. So this is, I'm sorry, I don't want to do this lightly, but this is an awful lot like the obligatory Heil Hitler stuff. It's funny, but it's kind of chilling. Only Trump can do this. Only Trump can do that, and Macron has, I think, run a fine line. I think Zelensky realized that he needed to ingratiate himself to Trump, but it hasn't worked too much. And Fareed Zakaria wrote an essay that I just thought, if we're going to understand what in the hell Trump's thinking about Ukraine, let's go back and look at the history that Fareed reviewed. And what it boils down to is Trump's got a personal grudge with Zelensky that goes back to 2019. So this is 5 years of a grudge. The president of Ukraine that preceded Zelensky, his name was Poroshenko. And Trump had a deal with Poroshenko to share the dirt on Hunter Biden. And he thought, and everybody thought, that Poroshenko was going to win because his opponent was this young comedian. And lo and behold, Zelensky won. Just like the character that he plays on TV, a school teacher who inadvertently becomes the prime minister of Ukraine. But Zelensky unseated Poroshenko, upsetting the deal whereby Trump would get dirt on Hunter Biden. And then we had that infamous phone call that led to impeachment. Just going back through old history here. And now we're going to go even further back. 2016, Trump's running, and his campaign manager is Paul Manafort, and we remember him. And that year, it was very strange. There was no mention of Ukraine in the Republican Party platform. And why was that? Manafort had a history with Ukraine. He was on the payroll of Ukraine's former president back in 2004. He's had a couple of terms. And then again in 2010, he was on the payroll. And this is the politician who, under pressure from Putin, reneged on Ukraine joining the EU. And that's what caused the Maidan protests, which became quite violent. And he fled to safety to Russia, where he still is to this day. And right after that is when Putin said, okay, you're not going to let my guy stay in power. I'm going to take, it's going to cost you Crimea. But Manafort goes back with this guy to 2004, to that campaign. And the Orange Revolution. What was the Orange Revolution? Well, the first running of this election in 2004, Yankovic won, but it was contested. There was obvious fraud, and that triggered the Orange Revolution. And you may remember the liberal opponent was this Yushchenko, and he was poisoned with dioxin. Dioxin causes chloracne, and you may remember, I certainly do, how disfiguring that was for this politician. So the election was rerun, and Yushchenko won. So Manafort, remember, was Yankovic's campaign manager. So Manafort was in pretty deep in Ukraine. Going back to 2016, the allegations that Russia interfered in our election, and Trump was so incensed at these allegations, he was looking for any kind of defense or way to deflect these charges. And he came up with this strange conspiracy that it was actually Ukrainians pretending to be Russians who were to blame for making it appear like they were intervening on Trump's behalf. So there was a purported Ukrainian server that would prove that it was Ukrainians, not Russians, who interfered in our election. And in that phone call, where Trump is number one asking for dirt on the Bidens that Poroshenko was going to give him, but he hoped that now Zelensky upset Poroshenko, that now Zelensky would give him the dirt on the Bidens. But there was a second part of that. He wanted Zelensky to find the server that would prove that Ukrainian shenanigans. And he held up the military aid to Ukraine. What was Ukraine trying to do? They were trying to suppress the Donbass revolution. These are the rebels in the Donbass rebelling against Kiev, and with Russian support. Zelensky refused all this, and there was no server, so it wouldn't be too hard to refuse that. And so I present all this history just to understand that a lot of what we're seeing today is petty payback that goes back at least to 2016, and the story with Manafort really starts in 2004. So you got to understand that history. That's the context. And we talked about this before. Trump's already, we talked about how he said maybe Ukraine will be Russia, maybe it won't. And he wants the $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals. So at least we don't feel stupid. If you can, that's pretty transactional. And if he's elevated, calling Zelensky a dictator, where does that come from? And he started the war. It's just the ego of this guy. And so just remember, Ukraine starting the war, nobody thought that in 2022, where the General Assembly voted 141-5, rejecting Russia's invasion, demanding that Russia immediately withdraw. Well, yesterday, there was a revote on that 3 years later, and unbelievably, the United States voted against that resolution condemning Russia. And now instead of 141, it was 93, but 93 is still pretty good versus 18, this time 65 abstentions. The United States offered an alternative that didn't even mention Russia's aggression. And so the resolution that passed, thankfully, did mention it. It's just amazing, the turnaround. Who does the United States vote with? With Russia, Israel, North Korea, Belarus. Interesting that Israel voted that way. China and India abstained. So in a way, we were supporting Russia more than China was. Go figure. So somebody manipulated the Google Maps. I don't know how you do that, but labeled Mar-a-Lago Kremlin headquarters. I thought, I don't know how long that lasted. So the UN Security Council, that was the General Assembly. The Security Council then later approved a US-sponsored resolution, 10-0, that eliminated a mention of Russia as the aggressor. So watered down. Trump has talked recently about this deal for Ukrainian minerals going through, and that he thought there was a good chance it would go. We'll see. Fareed just points out how historic this is, that it's a principle enunciated at Nuremberg, that it's a crime to take territory by force. That's what we're turning our back on, a principle established at Nuremberg. And it's part of the United States Charter. It's been implemented most memorably in the North Korea aggression in 1950 and the Iraqi aggression in 1991. And we've policed it. Yeah, Jim.
I just point out that Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, and the Philippines were taken over by force by the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. That was before Nuremberg. So,
and your point is?
The point is that it basically worked. This arrangement after World War II, international law, between 1816 and 1945, there was about one territorial conquest every year. Since 1945, there's just been a handful until Ukraine, the biggest example of actual war. What we did in overreacting to bin Laden in Iraq, who didn't have anything to do with 9/11 in 2003, was a huge step backwards. And now this whole system is being reversed because of Trump's personal peak. So an unraveling, there's a database maintained in Scandinavia, and it just shows an uptick of what we know to be happening, like in Ukraine, aggression, usually of authoritarians. And Francis Fukuyama just calls it what it is. We're losing, democracy's losing the fight with authoritarianism. We just switch sides. It's not like we're neutral. We're actually cheering on the aggressors, and it's sad. So much for Pax Americana, the mutual defense organization like NATO's been very successful. Security treaties with Japan and South Korea have kept the peace in that part of the world, and prosperity. Fukuyama talks about this National Endowment for Democracy, and all of a sudden, this has appeared on the radar and been politicized. It's a non-governmental organization that Russia in particular has been critical of, and now it's being attacked here in the United States. We should have known this vote in the UN was coming when at the G7 statement that came out on the Ukraine situation. We objected to calling Russia the aggressor at the G7 meeting. We're thinking now about Munich in 1938, and this is the British Defense Minister Ben Wallace, who has, like Fukuyama, labeled it for what it is, and a fairly conservative columnist for the New York Times puts Vance in the same category. What he said at Munich. There's an annual security conference at Munich. So it's coincidentally the same city where Neville Chamberlain gave Hitler what he wanted, Czechoslovakia. So Timothy Snyder asks, what if the Czechs had held off the Germans the way the Ukrainians held off as Putin? Just something to think about. And columnists are speculating, will all the hard-won gains in the Black Sea that Ukraine has done with their navy, they have fought Putin and pushed him out, basically, of the western part of the Black Sea. And is all that going to be for naught? And I think this says it. Expresses my opinion, at least, fairly well. So what would make all this make sense? And one is if Trump is playing three-dimensional chess and ingratiating himself with Putin for a purpose, which is to twist Putin's arm and get Putin to agree to something like instant NATO membership if Russia breaks a peace deal. Well, that would be something. We'll see. So I think this would probably be a good place to stop. I'll come back to this. Turkey may be a role to play. So I'll just end by saying, keep your eye on Turkey. They may be a place where this is negotiated, and they may be a sponsor of a final peace agreement. So there was something called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement in 2022 that apparently Boris Johnson said no to and encouraged Zelensky to keep fighting. Anyway, that's where I'm going to stop. And I'll pick up here next week. I hope that I'll get to.
Diversity depends on a free press. Please support our independent.
We'll get to the point of talking about why 30% of the American population strongly supports Trump, and it has to do with our history and our frontier. And I'll make that case next week. So, questions?
Wow.
Comments?
Well, I thought you were going to talk about the American character today.
I was, but the reason to talk about the American character is to try to explain what's happened in the last month, especially the last week. So I thought I'd do that first and then try to explain it. Yeah, Shigeko.
I was wondering what the European nations are doing to support Ukraine if we back away.
Well, I was getting to that. Macron has filled the void, and he called an emergency meeting yesterday and gathered the major European countries and the representative of the EU and NATO along with Keir Starmer. And it looks like there is a partnership developing between Starmer and Macron. They had a meeting. They have upped the sanctions on Russia beyond what they were before, and then Macron apparently then got on the phone and called 15 countries that hadn't been able to come to the meeting or weren't invited, and so. We'll see. The new chancellor in Germany is a hawk. That is he's promising to give more support to Ukraine than Olaf Scholz did. So there are some glimmers of hope coming from Europe. Yeah, Homer.
I don't know if if you've heard this revisionist view of Chamberlain's betrayal of Czechoslovakia at Munich. I've read that Chamberlain knew that the British military was very far from ready, and in a way sacrificed himself and his own reputation to gain a few years for preparation of the British Navy and armed forces. I just wonder what the historical record shows on that. I think that was a period when there was great investment in Britain on improving their military capacities in the years after the Munich Accord.
Yeah, no, that's true. And they developed the plane. You would know this, Homer. What plane did they develop? The Spitfire?
Well, yes, I think so.
Yeah, yes, but remember. Churchill's years were called the wilderness years, and that was the whole decade of the 30s where he was sounding the alarm and being ignored. Maybe by 1938 it was a little late, and that's an interest that I hadn't heard that about Chamberlain sacrificing himself. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, a question, or not a question, but my son referred me to actually it's a Democracy Now! Show, and with Amy Goodwin, and she's interviewing a Belgian fellow, and it has to do with the assassination of Lumumba. And so what he came up with is it's called currently and I think it's up for an Academy Award. It's called the Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, and so that would be one. I think it's maybe on Canopy. So if anybody has Canopy, but that's very interesting about how the CIA and kind of goes back into really the Dulles brothers, and how all of the corruption and what he was leading us into, and essentially the forerunner to Vietnam, and kind of what was all going on at the time. And I think Eisenhower is actually involved. This was before Kennedy, and Eisenhower was involved, and the CIA, the Congo was a democratic nation at that time, as they were just breaking out, and it had to do with all of the amount of the number of nations that were, once the colonies were all abandoned, they essentially between Asia and Africa had more members in the UN than essentially the US and Russia and the EU, so or NATO at that point in time. So very interesting kind of history.
Yeah, at that time, with the Dulles brothers, the Mossadegh and Iran would have been, I think, the intervention that had the longest tail, as it were, the blowback. So yeah. Interesting times. Yeah, Michael.
One of the other things, because I'm interested in aviation history, various countries, I mean, Chamberlain may have been trying to buy time, but all these various countries, France, the Netherlands, Britain, were desperately buying military equipment, mainly from the United States, in the years leading up to the beginning of World War II. I mean, a lot of these countries saw things coming and were arming themselves and trying to build up their military forces. So it wasn't that Chamberlain was buying time for England. I mean, everybody saw trouble coming and may not have made a deal to sell off part of a country or a country. So everybody was looking over their shoulder at what Hitler was up to.
Yeah, there's an interesting documentary about Hawaii, and in the 1930s in Hawaii, their Chamber of Commerce deliberately had representatives from every ethnic group in Hawaii, and they knew something was coming with Japan. And they invited the FBI to come and sit in on their meetings so that the FBI would have an understanding that all the ethnicities, including the Japanese Americans, were basically loyal citizens. Yeah, Harold.
Another historical book that's worth reading is called Faustian Bargain. And it's all about the back channel cooperation between Germany, even before Hitler came in, and the Soviet Union. How they traded, Germany could practice doing their military stuff in Russia out from under the eyes of the regulators, and the Germans would trade their military expertise to the Russians in return.
What was
Faustian Bargain. It's a really good read.
What was the name of it again?
Faustian Bargain.
And of course, there was the Molotov-Ribbentrop friendship treaty.
that came way later. This was like 15 years before that.
Oh, really? Wow. Wow. Interesting stuff. Okay, guys.
Well, thank you, John.
Yeah,
Thank you, John.
All right. See y'all. See you next week.
Oh, John, I'll be gone. I'll be on a plane.
On a plane.